How are GP trainers assessed?
The most important thing about a GP school is that we're really a virtual organisation. We don't have a building or any actual place to be. So it's a way of actually keeping in touch with the trainers and the practices and the places where the training goes on, and developing a shared value base about what we want to see in education. And we couldn't do that by looking at paperwork. We have to go out there and actually see it on the ground.
Most visits are a positive experience.
I think we work with this summative, formative idea where we're both going out to approve something, but also to do a developmental conversation. So most of what I personally really value about visiting is getting to know the people, the networks, building those conversations for when things happen in the future. And if something does go wrong in the future, it makes it so much easier to go back and deal with it.
The paperwork can sometimes seem overwhelming.
That's primarily because there are a lot of things that have to be ticked off in terms of making sure things are okay from the GP school, and something called the Gold Guide format. So there are a lot of questions, and it does seem that sometimes they're repetitive, and it may be in the future that will be slimlined and made a little bit more sensible. But doing that paperwork actually makes you think of the things that are important, particularly for the first visit. Going through the paperwork, thinking through all the questions that are on there, and really making those answers your own will be enormously valuable. Actually, preparing otherwise for the visit is really just about making sure that people in the practice on the day have the space so that we can speak to them and talk to them. And we like to talk to as many people as possible to get as many different views about how, either in a new practice, how they would see learning, and in an already established practice for a reapproval visit, how they might see things changing or where they might want to see things going in the future.
A team from the GP school would normally attend the visit.
There would be usually myself, a patch associate director, who would lead the team. On a new visit, I would usually bring a programme director with me so that they can get to know the practice and the trainer. There would be at least one other trainer, and there would be a visiting practice manager. We'd spend a little bit of time together just working out what we need to do, and reading through any queries that arose from the paperwork. And then we would spread ourselves out to talk to various people in the practice, nurses, other doctors, other managers, administrators, receptionists, whoever we can get our hands on. And then we would sit down, one or two of us would sit down and spend some time with the trainer, going through some of the questions and exploring various avenues with the trainer, before spending some time reviewing a part of a video that the trainer would have made, and feeding back to them. Then the whole team would share all their findings from their various different people they've spoken to, and we would come up with some recommendations of areas for future development and decide whether the practice was fine to go ahead as a training practice. So we often say that practices have to be of a very high quality, and to a certain extent that's true, but actually that's not always possible in London. Some of the practices are in very difficult areas. They have really hard problems to work with, and they may not tick off every single quality indicator in QOF and all the other things that we have to do. But I would be interested in how they responded to something like that, actually what their plans were in terms of a practice in tackling those areas. GPs are going to go out into all sorts of different practices, and they need to know how to work with areas of difficulty as well. So I would be interested in exploring things like that. If a practice had an event that had gone wrong with a learner at some point, I'd be interested in how they responded to that, what they'd learned from that, and what they were doing differently. So I would want to explore in a little bit more detail those sort of things. What sort of things have trainers been reading? What has enthused them? What have they thought has been important? What has changed them in the last year or 2 years?
The trainer is encouraged to put forward a video of them training.
And that's easiest for them if they're doing it a one-to-one teaching. I have seen people put forward videos when they're doing teaching of a group. I don't think that puts them in the best light, so I would say to people, don't do that. It's very hard to do group work when you're when you're trying to demonstrate how you're teaching. So a one-to-one conversation with a learner around whatever area, it doesn't really matter for a video. I would normally say to the trainer to ask me, I would usually ask the trainer what they felt on having looked at it themselves were areas they'd want us to comment on, so that they have some ownership of that. We won't watch all the video. The video will usually be often an hour long, so we'll probably watch about 10 or 15 minutes of that. We often quite like to watch a bit at the beginning to see how objectives about the learning session have been made. We'll watch a little bit in the middle to see how the actual conversation goes, how much of it is trainee-led, how much it is trainer-led, and we'll probably watch something at the end to see some summary of that. It will depend on what the trainer wants, how we do that. We might let the trainer stop it where they feel it'd be useful to talk about something. We might actually watch a large chunk of it before talking about it. So I would very much want that part of the visit to be a very formative process. However, we would make a decision at the end of it whether if it was terrible, we'd have to say that, that this is not what we're looking for. And it will very much depend on the level of the learner they're working with about what would be a good video. There's no right and wrong answer. I would also be very interested in the trainer's response to that conversation. So often you will watch a bit of a video and a good trainer will be able to come up themselves with all the things they would have done differently. And for me, that's the ideal. If you can watch your own video and say, this was good, that wasn't so good, this is what I'd be doing differently, actually, you're probably going to be fine.
All trainers in London GP schools are expected to attend trainers' workshops.
Before a visit, we would want you to be involved in your local workshop at the trainer. We would usually say try and get involved about 6 months before, but at the minimum 3 months before. The workshop is enormously helpful because they'll help you prepare for the visit. They might even if you wanted them to, they'd look through your video with them. They'd tell you, all the other trainers would tell you the nuts and bolts of how to be a good trainer. And often a workshop will identify one individual who might be a mentor to a potential trainer and talk them through all that and how it's going to be. When I go around training practice and talk to trainers and say, why are you training? What do you get out of it? A lot of trainers say the reason they continue doing it is actually their learners keep them up to date. So they're bringing it, they're always curious, they're asking questions and they're challenging their trainers, which they enjoy. They like that additional challenge. They love to see how somebody changes throughout the year and how their interaction with them can enable that to happen. They enjoy, and most of the good trainers really just enjoy training.
Here are some questions that are intended to get you thinking about this subject in greater depth. How can one assess the educational ethos of an organisation? What extra information can you obtain from interviewing a team of people together rather than holding a series of one-to-one interviews? What questions would you ask the receptionist staff? How would you evaluate your own teaching? There's further discussion of this subject in our e-learning module on assuring and maintaining quality in clinical education. Go to faculty.londondeanery.ac.uk/e-learning and select the topic from the left-hand panel. If you're a student on our postgraduate certificate course, you'll find references and suggestions for additional reading within the online resource folder.